Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. We're a father-son business podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And today we're joined by Pam Aubrey. I always debate, Pamela's a nice name too, but I'm just gonna like we're old buddies. I'm gonna call you Pam. How you doing today, Pam?
That works. That's great. I'm doing well. Just grateful to be here.
Awesome. I want to. My first thought in reading up on you, don't you always feel weird when somebody says reading up on you? Like, dang, I hope you didn't find anything bad.
Is that a good thing? Yeah.
Where were you reading?
Yeah. What is it about marketing that's filling your cup up? Because you've been doing marketing type things, whether it's labeled or not, but marketing type things for quite a while. What is it about marketing that's filling your cup up?
Yeah, it's funny. The last few years, what has really lit my fire with marketing is helping people really grow their business and accomplish what they want to accomplish. I think that it's easy in business to get stuck in the busy work. There's always just busy work to do. And so for me, that people piece of it is just huge. I really love seeing people succeed, and that's the fun in it for me.
Give us.
How do you go ahead?
Well, I was just going to do a follow up. Can you give us a quick success story of like a client you helped and you said, well, do these 3 things or 10 things or this post, whatever?
Yeah, so I worked with a client kind of really early on when I started my business that ran an e-commerce training program. And it was kind of like, a startup when I came on board. They'd been running for a little while, but not very long. And they were still getting things off the ground. And there were all these kind of parts and pieces that they hadn't really considered or, didn't have systems or processes for. And so that's where I came in. I just was able to help them fill in some gaps, help them figure out, how do we approach some of these things a little bit differently. And it was really, for me, a lot of fun to be able to do that. I learned a lot myself. But also, it was really a pleasure to be able to take what wasn't working and make it work. Primarily for the clients, right? Because ultimately, that's what we're trying to do in business. We're trying to give the client what they need most. And so, yeah, it was, it really turned out to be a very successful business. And it was really, for me, it was kind of the perfect, really first, I guess, foray into being an independent contractor.
Talking the marketing aspect, but then also just in general, when your whole approach to it is wanting to help people, how do you figure out who to help and who not to help? Because that's the most dangerous thing, is you try to help everybody, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, at a certain point after you've been in the business world for a little while, you know what you know and you know what you don't know, sort of thing. And so when you're talking to people initially and sort of, I guess, in a way being quote unquote interviewed by them, you're sort of interviewing them as well, right? And so you're kind of determining at that point, is this really a good fit? And I think that's where we have to have, ethics in business and say, I'm not really sure maybe I'm the right person for this particular thing, but I know someone who is, and I have a long list of people on my referral list. And if I don't feel like someone is right for me or I'm not right for them, then I'm just going to refer them to someone I think is right for them.
How'd you learn that lesson? Because that's such a critical piece to being successful in life and in business. Did you learn it the hard way? Is there like a horror story that goes with that?
Well, not really. I mean, at least not as an entrepreneur. Like I said, though, I spent a lot of years in the business world before I ever became an entrepreneur. And so, I think that gives you that kind of experience where you realize that there are just other people that have strengths that you don't. And you sort of accept that. It's like, okay, this is my lane and I'm okay with staying in it. And so for me, I would rather stay in my lane. I would rather be in this space where I know we're going to get results and we're going to get things done, and it's going to cost the client less and it's going to be efficient versus, me trying to go in and make something happen that I don't really know that I can do. And then, I'm not delivering the way I want to. That for me is not fulfilling. And then of course the client isn't getting results. So.
How do you communicate that to the clients? Because I think that's one of those things that, you might understand it perfectly and it's all perfect up here, but getting them to understand, like, hey, I can't help you because X, Y, Z is a much more difficult thing. So how do you communicate that to them?
I find it interesting because when you have that conversation, 9 times out of 10 with people, they're just happy that you are being honest with them, right? And so it's kind of like being straightforward about here's what I can do, here's what I'm good at. And then being able to say, but here are the pieces that, I really think we could outsource, or I can find someone else, or I know someone else. And you'd be surprised how many times that actually can be, can help in the deciding factor of whether you're the right person or not, because they may decide, oh, well, you know what? Okay, then we'll just have you do that piece and have this other person do this other piece. Or maybe we'll look into someone else that we know of that could do this other piece. It's so much better to have that conversation and just be open than to go into it thinking, oh, I can do this, or having them thinking you can do it and then you can't.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of trust built up from just that simple statement of, well, I'm not the best person who can do this, or even in a leadership role, I like to remind people of that is, guys, I really don't know. We're going to have to figure this one out. I don't have the answer. And there's a huge amount of trust that's built up. And that trust enables you to believe in that person and trust that person, circular reporting there. But in that fact of how do you do it better? And seeing the results is always great, but what I'm really wondering about is when you step into that enterprise entrepreneurial world, you cut the tether from the every 2-week paycheck or whatever, that security of I go into the office, I sit down in this chair, I do these things, then I come home. And then I go back, and you're in this nice routine, and you cut that tether. What was the catalyst that said, all right, it's time for me to launch and go on my own?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story, actually. I had really reached a point in my life that was kind of a crisis point. And I had, like I said, been in the business world for quite some time, but I had reached a point where I really felt like I was stagnant and I wasn't going anywhere, and I wasn't going to go anywhere if I didn't really make some changes. And so I was like desperately looking for something different. And so much so that I went on Craigslist. I actually love to tell this story because I find it humorous myself. But it's sort of, it's telling about my life because this is sort of like how my life has been. So I went on Craigslist, like the last place you would ever go look for a job, right? And especially one that you wanted to go somewhere. And I came across this ad for this position that I thought, this surely can't be as good as it sounds. But you know what? What do I have to lose? I'm going to apply for it. So I did. And this man calls me literally the next day and says, I'd love to talk with you. Can we set up an appointment with the boss? And I said, yeah, sure, great, fantastic. So did that. And literally like 2 days later, it was almost right off the bat. And within the course of that conversation, they told me this is basically a sales job, which I never really had outside of real estate. So it was going to be, I mean, I would be jumping into the deep end, and I knew it. And I told them this, I haven't done sales outside of real estate, but you know, I could give it a go. And I said, but here's the deal, is that I'm a single mom and I have rent to pay. So I need to know, bottom line, at least my rent is covered. And so they agreed to pay me, first time I ever negotiated for myself in my life, by the way. And so they agreed to pay me a base that would cover my rent every month. So I said, okay, let's do it. So I jumped in, and the first month I made like 100 calls a day for their database. And I mean, just to get someone to answer the phone was a small miracle, right? Yeah. And so after the end of the first month, we had a consensus that things weren't really going the way anyone wanted them to, and we were going to have to make a change. Well, I mean, this was really kind of like, I feel like this was like God stepping into the situation, because all of a sudden I am now in the room with people who are extraordinary salespeople, but they're also just mindset gurus. I mean, these are the people that are the best of the best. And it was such a game changer for me. I mean, I could have never dreamed going into the position that that's what would happen, but I learned so much from them. And so I literally spent the next few months going through a training with this group, and then simultaneously, learning to do sales like trial by fire. And it was really an incredible thing to go through, to experience, and then to sort of come out the other side, having sales, building this sales team with them, building this company with them, and then filling in all these other gaps along the way. Sort of just becoming like, they would joke that I was the octopus. They're like, Pam's the octopus on the team because she's just got her tentacles in everything. And it was true. I was doing a little bit of everything. But it was a great experience. And that really sort of like launched me into an entirely different place in my life, where it was like, okay, I can do things that I never thought I could do or ever wanted to do. And I tell people, I really am like the reluctant entrepreneur. I never had the, goal to run a business. I never had the big dreams and aspirations of I got to go out there and get it. That was not it. I just really wanted to provide a good life for my son. And, I feel like I've really been blessed in that sense to have had some of the opportunities that I've had along the way to try to make that happen.
What were some of or maybe just one of the keys that you got in that first chunk of the sales training with all those people who were really good at it and you were going through that learning curve? What was your one key takeaway?
Wow, that is a very good question. That is difficult to answer because there was so much. But for anybody who's kind of familiar with like Tony Robbins, one of the guys who led the sales team and the marketing division is a guy by the name of Mark von Musser. And he just has this incredible heart, and he loves to see people succeed. And I think, for me, that resonated with me, the kind of person that he was and the way that he really invested himself in what he did. And that piece of it alone really set a good example for me of what it means to go into a business and to just put your heart and soul into it to help people get where they want to go. And so that was the one thing that I took away, was just the power that we have as individuals, but then also because of the training and because of, the level, the depth of what you learn, it really helped me to understand what I was capable of doing. And, that getting that mindset piece in the beginning was so crucial for me. And then being able to identify that in other people, where that's missing or what some of those pieces are in their business that are lacking and why that is, and how that can stem out of some of those other pieces. So that was probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned, that it's not all about the mechanics. Those are important. You have to have the strategies, you have to have the processes, but there's so much more to it than that.
what's a and this is kind of a different question, but what's a failed client? You know, where you brought your expertise and said, "Hey, here, guys, you say you want to do this. You say you want to be here. Do these steps with with your
Right.
marketing plan, your strategy, blah blah blah," and then they don't. What's that like? Can you describe that experience and what they screwed up?
I mean, yeah, I think that we all have those, as an entrepreneur or a contractor, when you go in and you work with a team, you're bound to have a team where things just, maybe they've done things a certain way for so long, or maybe you've just got, leaders that they want to do it their way, and I think when that happens, you really just kind of have to come to the point of going, okay, you know what, then this probably isn't the right fit. And that's okay. I mean, you have to be okay as an entrepreneur with letting clients go when it's not the right fit, because that just means they need to find someone else that is the right fit, and you need to find someone else who is the right fit. And, it's no hard feelings. I think that's the important part, that you can sort of leave a situation. Hopefully you can leave a situation and just go, okay, it's business, and, it's not going to work, and that's okay, and go on to the next thing.
We talk a lot about the gap between sales and marketing and how there could be such a big disconnect in a lot of organizations. How do you think your sales experience helped you stepping into the marketing world?
Well, since I had already been doing marketing prior to that, it really just sort of helped me see the connection between the two a little bit better. The marketing piece for me really was, it was just kind of already there. So it didn't really take a whole lot then to go into the contracting or consulting role and pull those two things together. And it actually just made it make more sense in a way, because now I've experienced it from the sales side and what it means to have good leads coming in versus, having people on the phone that don't even know why you're calling them,
Yeah.
In that same vein, then, how do you feel about that disconnect? And what have been your experiences there? What are your kind of thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the more common problems that businesses face, actually, and it's almost worse in larger companies, where there may not be great communication between the two departments. But even in smaller companies where you've got, maybe you've got an owner that just doesn't really understand either. They've done neither, and so they're trying to run a business and just go, here, you do it. And that doesn't really work, because you have to at least have a fundamental understanding of how the two things work together, and be open to kind of learning about that along the way. And so I think that's one of the bigger challenges that smaller businesses face, is just sort of figuring out how things are supposed to work and what that should look like, and then being able to actually implement it, right, and get the resources and have the people and all the things. It's it's no small feat to be a business owner in today's world. There's no doubt about it. It's very challenging, and especially right now, we're just in economic times that are challenging anyway. But as a business owner, you really have to hone, your departments. You really have to really have an understanding. You have to be really smart about what you're doing, and have smart people around you to be successful.
How do you, and the way it's rolling in my head is onboard a client, because, the analysis, the steps maybe that you follow to get to that point where, okay, now you can say, do this or do that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because every client is a little bit different, right? I mean, you never encounter the same problems, which is kind of, the fun of it too, in a way, is that you're always sort of solving problems. But yeah, I mean, there definitely is a discovery process that you want to go through with your clients, right up front, to figure out, okay, well, what's working and what isn't. And sometimes that's really straightforward. They already know what's not working, and they can kind of explain that pretty quickly. And sometimes it's a little bit more of a process, and you've got to kind of do a little digging and figure that out. So it really does kind of depend. But I personally have, just sort of a questionnaire that I send them, and that kickstarts our conversation. And then from there we can do a little deeper digging as we go along.
How do you manage that information gap? Because I think that's one thing, whether, think of it as consulting, coaching, anyone coming from the outside in with a lot of information and a lot of expertise, there's an information gap there. And sometimes the jargon you want to go tell them, like, hey, I need you to do this, but they don't even know what that word means type. You get this huge gap there where you might want to teach them all these things, but then you also have to have the balance of that could take months. So how do you balance that when it comes to the marketing aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a part of that is letting them know, look, a lot of the nitty gritty stuff you guys aren't going to need to know, because there are some things that initially up front they don't need to know. And as time goes on, some of those gaps will get filled in. But for me personally, I like to just kind of start with the bigger picture with most people and help them at least understand those parts and pieces, and then you can keep drilling down as time goes on. But you don't want to throw the book at people like immediately, like you've got to read this whole thing and figure it all out, because they're going to be overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's
have you had the other end of the spectrum on that, where it's a boss who's wanting to get in there and learn everything, and you have to be like, dude, you got a whole job to do. I don't know why you're in here with me.
I have not had that experience. 9 times out of 10, people are so busy, that it's challenging for them to even get to what you have for them to get to, let alone any more than that. But I would, this ties into the question that you asked earlier about having, a bad client. Sometimes you have clients who, they have an expectation, or maybe they've brought you in and they really just want you to do what they want you to do, even though they're saying that, they want you to give them some solutions and answers. And that's another kind of one of those situations where it's like, you have to determine if, they really want the solution, or if they really want to do it their way. And then if they want to do it their way, that's okay. You just have to have that conversation and go, okay, well, we can do it that way, but here's what, you should expect as an outcome, and whatever the case may be. And I think that's, that's kind of the important piece in everything, is that you just keep the communication going.
I love that, because I'm that way too on a lot of things. It's like, all right, I'm going to hire the expert, listen to the expert, and go, yeah, and then I'm going to go over here and do it my way anyways, right?
You are not alone in that.
Which made me start to. Yeah, I know. There's a whole bunch of us, unfortunately. Well, that's good for you too, because it made me think of when you're in that scenario, if you will. Instead, and Camden kind of alluded to this, do you throw the whole book and say, go learn this? Or is there a nice little baby spoon? You kind of go, here you go, take a little bite of this, and here you go. Next week we'll take another little bite. What's your favorite? You could even use a different metaphor if you'd like to describe that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you definitely do have to. I don't want to say spoon feed people, but sometimes you do, and there's nothing wrong with that. I get that business owners are very busy, and that it's hard. It's just very challenging to get to all of the things. And that's why they hire people, right? And so part of the job, I feel, as a consultant, is to give them the information that they need without overloading them and without making their job harder, right? Because they've got enough to worry about. So I think that's a good, I think that's a good analogy in a way. You know, the idea of like just giving people enough, you know, and not, you know, they're not, if they're a toddler sitting at the table with a 4-course meal, that's probably not gonna, you know, suit them very well. They might do better with a bowl of Cheerios. So, you know, just you kind of have to tailor it. You have to kind of tailor it for the audience, right?
This episode of the Cam and Otis Show. If you're enjoying this conversation, then make sure to share it with other lifelong learners in your life so they can enjoy it too. Stay up to date with the show on Facebook and Instagram at Cam and Otis Show, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you're the first to hear about new episodes and other special content. Now let's get back to the show. And, you know, talking about tailoring what you're doing, I think one of the interesting aspects for anyone really consulting with the business, but especially in the marketing world, is staying on top of the trends. What do you do inside of your own life to make sure that you're, you know, in that continuous self-improvement, staying on top of those trends?
Yeah, I'm constantly learning, constantly. And I'm a person that loves to learn. So I spend, you know, hours every week, you know, in some kind of training, some kind of learning environment, whether I'm reading, whether I'm listening, whether I'm watching, it's ongoing. And I think with marketing, especially now, that's absolutely essential. Things are just shifting so quickly with social media and, you know, all these different tools that we utilize. And even, you know, the way that we process and look at data. I mean, you just have to stay on top of it. It shifts so quickly. And if you don't, then, you know, you're going to be missing things. I mean, ultimately, that's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
What's a resource or your, you know, your top couple of resources that you use? And you don't have to say Cam and Otis Show. I mean, that's okay if it is. But, you know, what is, what, you know, because that there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of people that are wanting to be in that mindset of how do I get better? How do I get better? So I always love learning about what resources you use. You know, is it a book on the shelf? Is it a podcast? What?
Sometimes it's a book. Sometimes it's a podcast. Sometimes I'll do, I'm actually in the middle of some trainings right now through a university, through Northwestern University. You know, it's really all of it. I'm kind of that person that I feel like you can't really get too much good information, right? And so, and also part of that is, you know, seeing what different people are doing. So I like to watch, you know, follow different influencers and marketers and that sort of thing, and see what they're doing and see what's working and what isn't working. Because, you know, a lot of times you'll go out and you'll listen to people talk about, you know, what's working, and you'll do a training with someone, and then you'll walk away from it and you'll go, yeah, I mean, it's kind of working, but ironically, you're doing all these other things that you're not even talking about, right? And so it's just, to me, that's a big piece of putting together what actually works. Sure, I'm going to listen to what they say, but I'm also going to watch what they do.
Yeah, because you know what? It's not secret sauce if they tell you everything that's in it, is it?
Exactly.
How do you, I guess, when you look at marketing especially, there's so many different mediums you already talked about with all the changing social media landscape and those type of things. And I think the most interesting thing, you know, as an entrepreneur going through this myself, is that you can find so many success stories for each medium and for all these different types of businesses. So how do you connect the right business to the right medium for it?
Well, and that's when you need to know the business, you know, so that really takes place in some of those initial conversations where you determine, you know, what platforms are going to be the best fit. And 9 times out of 10, they're already utilizing some platform. So you have a little bit of a sense for what's working on that one platform. But yeah, and you know, it does vary. You can't, you know, e-commerce is a totally different beast than, say, you know, an attorney. You know, it's just 2 totally different worlds. And so it does take a little bit of consideration and understanding. when you start working with a client about the differences between industries and, where are people in those industries really operating and those sorts of things.
How much of the psychological aspect, the human psychology, do you like to get into? Do you enjoy that part, or is it more the reporting back from data?
Really both. I think that it's fascinating to sort of see how businesses do reach people and what works. And, so that piece of it is very interesting to me. But at the same time, then the data piece of it is interesting too. And, I think that there's an element there. What's interesting about marketing now is that it's kind of gone to this other level. It's not like marketing used to be, where it was just going out in newspapers and those sorts of things. Like it's such a part of our lives now, and there's this personal element to it. And I think that we've sort of reached a point where you can't really separate yourself entirely from your message as a business owner. And, it makes sense in a way, because we're doing business with people, right? And people want to do business with people. And so, having that human element is super, super important in your marketing.
How do you, I guess with all the different research we're talking about, going into these different areas, how do you then build that into, broadcasting the future of the marketing industry? Or is that something that, is, I don't know, part of me, whenever I want to ask those questions, I'm like, yeah, it's the most interesting thing for us to ask you from the outside looking in. But then, if you're in it, that can just completely kill your time if you're spending all your time thinking, what's marketing going to be like in 30 years when you're not even going to be in business then, right?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, because I happen to be one of those people that is interested in the future and what's coming and those sorts of things. And so I do think about that. But at the same time, like, business is happening in the here and now, right? Marketing is happening in the here and now.
Right.
And so the day to day, that's what you're really focused on. But the forecasting does give you a little bit of perspective. And certainly in terms of technology, because it is developing so rapidly, and it is such a big piece of marketing now that you can't ignore it. You certainly can't ignore it. And you have to have a sense of where things are going. And I don't think we entirely understand that at this point. But just kind of knowing what we know about what's happening with AI and with Meta, it does really, it gives us a pretty good look into the possibilities and what could be coming. And, you see these larger companies starting to build things in the metaverse, and we know that the blockchain is a very real thing, right? I mean, I know it's elusive for a lot of people if they don't really understand it, but the reality is that it will be the next internet, right? But it's going to be a wholly different type of internet. And if we think we're plugged in now, just wait. So, it's like you kind of have to have that in the back of your mind to, just thinking about the long term for your business, 10, 15 years out for sure.
What are some things when you look forward? And I want to preface this of take off the consulting hat, in the sense of, like, nobody out there listening to this episode make a huge life decision off of this, but because I want you to have fun with it. Looking forward, what do you see coming? Right?
Yeah. Well, I do think the metaverse is going to continue to expand. I think that there's a real push for that. And I think that, from a business standpoint, it can be very useful, and businesses will, eventually have to transition and start to figure out how to utilize it. What that represents to us personally and societally, that's a whole different conversation, a whole different set of considerations. But I do
Right.
think that that day and age is probably coming for certainly larger businesses. I mean, they're already looking at that. They're already investing in it. But smaller businesses will have to in time. But I also think that this is where there could be conceivably sort of a divergence of sorts, where you see a lot of smaller companies actually becoming a lot more locally focused, a lot more community focused, and you even see people returning to that and sort of going away from this technology that just wants to be, and in some senses, sort of all consuming. So yeah, that'll be a very interesting. It will be very interesting to watch that all play out.
Have you started to implement some of those tools into your practices? You know, how you're helping clients going forward?
Have you bought the metaverse billboards yet?
Right. You know, I work with a lot of smaller businesses. Most of them are, nowhere near being ready to get into the metaverse. Most of them are still, in some ways, trying to take full advantage of, the resources and the tools that we have available to us right now that are working right now. So, I don't really foresee that will be the case for probably a few more years at minimum.
Well, what excites you the most about that new, the metaverse, the AI bots, those sort of things? What's really, cueing your curiosity, I guess, and keeps you diving into it?
Yeah, I mean, there's potential there, I think, in many senses. To be totally honest with you, though, I am really more of a build in your own community kind of person. That's me personally. So not to say that there's anything wrong with the metaverse per se, but and that it won't need to be utilized and that there isn't some value there. But I personally feel that there is something to be said for maintaining, what we have had while incorporating some of those pieces that will work for business, if that makes sense. And I think that will be a process that, we have to go through as a society to kind of figure out what that looks like and how much of it we should and want to incorporate. With our businesses and with our lives, really.
I love that analysis of it so much, like how you put it earlier, that seeing things that will probably diverge in some way. Because really, and this takes me back to a conversation we had last week, I'm blanking on who it was with, Dad, but, talking about listening to music, and that you have like the example of Tidal right now, that's like the 4K Ultra HD music. And then you have at the same time people going back to record players and records and trying to be authentic and those type of things. And I think it really even takes me back to another conversation, Dad, Dr. Quello and Devon Hankins. When we talked about the future of agriculture, this came up as well, that you're going to need these giant industrial farms in order to provide, staple crops to the entire country and to the world. And then at the same time, the local agriculture is what's going to carry up the nutritional side of things. And I just have to talk about that for a second, because that's such an important thing, that when we look at these problems, it's not a this or that, it's this and that. We can do both. And that's usually going to be the answer when we're looking forward, when we're doing this forecasting, which is one of the most fun things about the show, right? It's forecasting in the future for all these different business trends. It's probably going to be a little bit of both. And I love that you're putting that together there.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that, and I know this is going to sound a little, it's going to sound a little out there, and I'll be totally, frank about the fact that I can be a little esoteric sometimes. But I think that there's really something to this divergence, and that we, as a species, are sort of reaching this point where we're coming back to ourselves a little bit. We're coming back to like this knowledge of who and what we really are, and sort of tapping into that in a different way. And what's fascinating to me about that is that, we really have sort of this like internal technology already about ourselves, if you want to call it that, that has really helped humanity to survive for so many centuries. And so to me, it'll be very fascinating to see how we evolve even as humans over the next couple of decades, 2-3 decades, and how that changes the way that we live. And we're seeing like this awakening that's sort of happening, right? Where people are coming back to these things and realizing, oh, there's more to life. And even like you look at the younger generations, like they're now seeking experiences over things, right? And so it's just these shifts that are happening at these other levels that will definitely play out. We'll see that impact business as well, because a lot of business will change the way that it's already changing. You see how corporations have changed since COVID, how businesses are shifting to accommodate for remote workers and for younger generations. So it all will tie in together, to be sure. And yes, we'll have a lot of things to figure out along the way.
It reminds me of the conversation we've had, Dad, the wizard versus the prophet looking towards the future. And again, it's going to probably be both. And it's like, as much as we think of these as, going towards, we're forecasting on it, it's something that's already happening. Think about the difference of a bunch of people living in New York City versus middle of Kansas. Like, there's already a big divergence on it. And I think you're right, Pam, of how we're going to see more and more of it. Because, as the pandemic went, I'm going to put this in a blunt way. It's more complicated than this, but where did all the rich people go? They moved to Wyoming. They moved to Arizona. They moved out into the middle of nowhere to embrace those things. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind while we're doing any forecasting in any different industry, is that it's going to be a bit of both, and that when you that the core elements are the thing to keep in mind there. That, like you talked about in the marketing aspect, the personal connection, that's always going to be there, whether it's, virtual in the metaverse, or it's some guy on the side of the street selling you, in local towns. It's always going to have those old connections as we move forward. So I think that's a really interesting piece there.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think, too, is sort of the mentality of, are we living to work? Are we working to live, right? And so people are coming to that sort of that realization that, okay, yeah, I don't want to work, 40, 50 years just to retire and not have the energy to do the things I want to do, right? And I would rather trade some of those things along the way to have some life, in the meantime. And so and I think a lot of that also has come out of COVID, where there's been, again, this shift. And so we'll see more and more of that, I think, as time goes on, where people really they want a quality of life over having an abundance of things, but then not really having the experiences and the fulfillment in their life that they really want.
Oh yeah. Well, although it'll be hard to get rid of the he who dies with the most toys in his garage is the winner. However, you are 100% right on the experiential, which really is something I was thinking about earlier. What you made a comment about the community, and as an independent, a solopreneur, what do you do about community? Who's your tribe? What are you doing for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a fantastic tribe, I must say. And that's been such an interesting journey for me, because I have personally evolved so much over the last several years. And I won't go into the whole long story, but that evolution was not a straight line, let's put it that way. And, there were some parts and pieces in there that were definitely not pretty. And I look back, and I realize that the people that are in my life now are genuinely some of the most wonderful people, that I could have as friends. And for me, a big piece of that has been because of my faith, which I have to say, that even that piece of it was such a long and sort of arduous journey. I didn't just I wasn't that kid, even though I grew up in a minister's home, I wasn't that kid that I was the perfect Christian my whole life. That just was not at all the case. There were, I had a lot of traumas, I had a lot of tragedies, I had a lot of things that I have had to overcome, but, each step of the way, there have been these little miracles that have happened as well. And so I just look back now and I realize that I've been blessed to have the people around me that I have around me, because I've had not so great people around me for periods of my life too, and I know what that looks like, and I know what can come from that. And so I'm very, very grateful, very, very grateful to have the tribe that I have now. Very loving people, very genuine people, that really just care about others and want to make a difference in the world, want to go out and help people live better lives, and just to live a truly fulfilling, joyful lives.
Oh, love it. That's so true, and it it is so important. And I'm glad you touched on the broader aspects of it, because I think that gets lost in the electronics that we all live in various degrees. Whether it's the average of average person spends 2 hours a day on social media, instead of 2 hours a day talking to somebody in person, and just little things like that just makes such a difference, going back to the human connection of who
Absolutely.
we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful.
Huge.
And I was looking back on my what did I learn, and the lessons that you talked about in the failed client, the trying to move forward, and then being that authentic person of really understanding who you are, and being truly authentic with others, your clients, other people, and saying, and not saying, well, just give me a check, I'll figure it out.
Right.
Because I've known people like that, right? The infamous, we'll do anything to include wash windows. That's not how you're successful. So
Right.
I think that's just a great reminder of how you can have success in your life, and being authentic and being honest and true to your clients and the people around you. So, Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, for me, I think it just goes back to the concept of the divergence there, and not in a us versus them way, not like you got to pick a team and this country's going to divide in half or anything like that, but just in personal preferences. And I think that's such a nicer way to look at it. I think when we look at the technology split like that and that divergence, it's so easy to get into the tribalism, us versus them, rather than just, hey, you like it that way, I like it this way. I like fast food, you like the home cooked meal. Doesn't matter, we're all existing together. So I think that's a really interesting piece. And going back to the wizard versus prophet thing, I think that's something that is a interesting concept to apply to other areas of our life, I'm realizing, rather than just, the agriculture and climate change conversation, but more so, hey, in everything, people are going to go back to, old school stuff. People are going to move forward to the super fancy metaverse stuff. And that's probably how a lot of trends are going to go.
Yeah. Well, definitely. Yeah. It's the and not the or. And
yeah.
Need a lot more ands going on in the world instead of the ors, I can tell you that.
Yes, sir.
So true.
Pam, how about
and
you?
I have to,
Go ahead,
say, yeah, I was just going to say, I have to say it's kind of ironic, because I am a little bit that kind of old school girl, I guess, sort of grassroots kind of mentality, and my son is a blockchain developer. So we have the and or in our household. So we get to have these conversations all the time, which is really fun, because it really is true. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, we are all in this together, right? I mean, and I know that has been said a million times, but I just mean overall, as humans, we're all on the same planet. We're all living, in the same space. And the more that we can find that place of working together, and finding the consensus. We don't have to agree about everything, but just how can we be peaceful? How can we operate in the same space together? Despite our differences, we're always going to have our differences, and in many ways, our differences, are things that we can celebrate. And so, having that perspective about it too is just that. it's okay to be different. We just have to be able to like have the conversations that we need to have.
Awesome. All right, Pam, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, so I think for me that this is a great way of sort of looking at this towards the end of the conversation, is that really all of these things do tie together, and I don't know that I really actually sat down and thought about it from this perspective, that all these parts and pieces really do kind of play in together. But I think that's a really great thing to sort of sit with for a little bit, is just that bigger perspective of how are all of these elements kind of coming together to affect not just our present, which is super important because that's what we have, right? We have the now, but also the future. And what do we really want that to look like? And, to really put that extra thought and consideration into, how do we approach some of these things going into the future? And how do we, how do we use them? How do we take the tools that we have and the resources and the possibilities and make the most of all of that?
Awesome. Love it. Love it. How do folks find you, connect with you, follow you?
Yeah, really best place to find me and connect with me is LinkedIn. I'm there quite a bit, so it's pretty easy. You can just look me up, Pamela Aubrey. And I've got a website, risingenergy.com, so you can also find me there. But I would love to just connect with you directly. So if you find me on Facebook, that's fine too. LinkedIn, either one is great.
Awesome. Yeah. Great stuff, Pam. This has been a lot of fun, and really appreciate your time with us today.
This was a great deal of fun. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to the Cam and Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Pam Aubrey, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass it along to someone else so they can enjoy it too. Make sure to follow the Cam and Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And while you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button too. As always, the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.